We all know the term soul and have our own ideas and opinions about it. But did you know that shining structure floaters may have helped shape these very ideas? Let us look back to Greece in the first millennium BCE. During this period, new movements of thought and inquiry emerged. The early philosophers were no longer satisfied with mythical stories about gods. Instead, they sought to discover what the world, life, and human beings really are through observation and systematic questioning. At the time, the concept of the soul underwent a transformation. In the Homeric epics, psyche, the Greek word for soul, is still a pale image of the person, condemned after death to a sorrowful existence in the realm of shadows. Then two significant developments took place. On the one hand, there were the religious philosophical movements of the Orphics and the Pythagoreans. Their followers no longer understood the soul as a mere image of the human being, but as the person's true essence. This essence was believed to be immortal, to migrate from body to body, and to be capable of purification and liberation through ethical conduct. The soul thus became a divine principle. In the biographical work Vitae Philosophorum by Diogenes Laertius, the Pythagorean conception of the soul is described in more detail. The soul, we are told, is a detached portion of the warm and cold ether. The text continues.
The whole air is full of souls which are called genii or heroes. These are they who send men dreams and signs of future disease and health. And it is to them that purifications and lustrations, all divination, omens, and the like, have reference.
On the other hand, Greece also witnessed the emergence of the idea that the soul is part of nature and matter. Thales of Miletus, for example, regarded the soul as the cause of all motion. Other natural philosophers identified the soul with air or fire. Such ideas were brought together by Leucippus and Democritus in their doctrine of atoms. According to this theory, reality consists of infinitely many solid and unchanging smallest particles called atoma, the indivisibles. And within this system, the soul also has its place. For the ancient atomists, the soul was simply a special class of atoms. These soul atoms were characterized by constant motion, by fire and warmth, and by their perfect spherical shape. Through breathing, living beings continually exchange these soul atoms with their environment. Whoever dies loses all soul atoms with the final breath and thus loses the soul itself. So on the one hand, we find an idealistic conception of the soul. The soul as the ultimate and immortal core of consciousness in living beings. On the other hand, a materialistic conception developed. The soul as a natural and material, elementary particle of the universe. This may sound irreconcilable, yet there is a common feature. In both the spiritual and the atomistic traditions, souls are entities that exist in great numbers in the air, move through it, and interact with human beings. This is reminiscent of shining structure floaters. Could it therefore be that both conceptions of the soul originated in observations of the shining structure? The evidence in the literature is only indirect, since we lack written records of the Pythagoreans and the early atomists. What we know about them comes from later philosophers, such as Aristotle. In his work De Anima, Aristotle reports the theories of the soul held by both the Pythagoreans and the atomists. In both cases, he mentions particles floating in the air and visible in sunlight. Referring to Democritus, he writes,
Hence Democritus affirms the soul to be a sort of fire or heat, for the shapes or atoms are infinite, and those which are spherical he declares to be fire and soul. They may be compared with the so-called motes in the air, which are seen in the sunbeams that enter through our windows.
Here Aristotle uses the Greek term zysmata to refer to particles suspended in the air. In this passage, It is translated as motes and is used as an illustrative example for the movement of the soul. However, if we examine these passages more closely, an entoptic phenomenon may also be intended. The expression "they may be compared" is the English translation of the Greek hoion. But hoion can also be understood in the sense of namely or that is. In that case, the motes would be a concrete and perceptible example of the soul atoms, or they might even be the soul atoms themselves. But if so, then these keen observers of nature and profound thinkers would have regarded dust in the air as souls. Can that really be the case? Hardly. We therefore need to take a closer look at the term zismata. Literally, zismata does not mean dust. Rather, the term refers to particles that have been scraped or rubbed off some material. This could indeed apply to the luminous structure, since it appears as a structure composed of particles of light, that is, particles that have detached themselves from a larger, perhaps unstructured body of light. And thanks to Diogenes, we know that at least the Pythagoreans thought about the soul in precisely this way. Souls are particles that have separated from something greater, in this case the ether. For the Atomists too, the idea of the soul as dust makes little sense. According to Democritus, the soul atoms would have to be perfect spheres, which is not true of airborne dust but is true of the spheres of the luminous structure. The luminous spheres also fulfill other criteria of the soul atoms. They are in constant motion, they are fiery, that is luminous, they are everywhere, and they are normally invisible, except when there is sufficient light and careful attention. A little later, Aristotle turns to the Pythagorean conception of the soul. Here the matter becomes even clearer.
The doctrine of the Pythagoreans seems also to contain the same thought. Some of them identified soul with the motes in the air, others with that which sets these motes in motion.
There was therefore a notion that the abraded particles were in fact souls. It is unlikely that ordinary dust or ordinary vitreous floaters contributed to these ideas of the soul. More likely, they arose from the observation of the clearly structured, mobile, and luminous phenomenon of shining structure floaters in more intense and attentive states of consciousness. Thus, when we today believe that our existence is grounded in a fundamental core of consciousness, or when we assume that the world consists of elementary particles that combine to form both our material and our psychological reality, then the early observation of the shining structure may have left its traces here.